Hello, and welcome to Friday, but also Wednesday, the 13th of December. It's Friday, 2019. It's Wednesday in 1939, 80 years ago. That is not the only timeline fun we've got going on today. Oh no. We also have the fact that, technically, all the timelines that have been recorded were recorded in the timeline of the local period. However, I am sending them out GMT-wise. The reason I've done that is to preserve the timeline arc in terms of how things happen sequentially, in terms of the minutes coming out, but also because once you start working out whether it should be +2 as they're recording in their timesheets or +3 as it should be according to the time zone, and the various discrepancies between the different accounts in terms of timelining, it was all getting a lot of very complicated maths. And I thought, well, I can explain that all at the beginning, and I can explain it all in the writing for Global Maritime History, but what I will do is I will keep, for the enactments, I will keep the timeline sequence roughly correct. But the timings itself, I'll just go with GMT. Because also, if you're following, and I do realise I mostly have a British audience, I of course, as any historian, like to have a global audience, but I have a feeling it's a mostly British audience following my Twitter account. It makes sense if it's done in GMT timeline because people are actually awake. Always helps if your audience you're tweeting at are awake. So, plus that, I will be doing not only the normal timeline, but a +12, and that made it also far easier to keep with the to just use the timeline in a GMT sequence. What else? There are going to be 2 or 3 shorts from this particular video produced. Those are 2-minute videos. But the whole video itself is going to be much longer and is going to go on YouTube. It's going to be about 20-25 minutes, roughly, according to my practices. So hopefully that works out. And hopefully you find it all useful. So without much further ado, it is now Wednesday, the 13th of December, 1939, and it is roughly 6 AM in the morning. Roughly. The crews have actually been awake for a few hours already. The crews have been up. In terms of the Royal Navy ships, since about 5 AM they were put on for dawn, full alert status. They're now, by about 6 AM, have reduced their watch. They are one gun manned at each turret, this sort of thing. So let people get some food. They haven't done a dawn patrol with an aircraft because, honestly, even though they have more aircraft, HMS Exeter of course is carrying 2, and Ajax has an aircraft aboard her. That has 2 actually aircraft aboard her, but one isn't really that serviceable. They are not pushing on this because they're trying to maintain serviceability of aircraft, and also, remember, they're not expecting to run straight into the Graf Spee. They're expecting to hear a merchant ship shouting out for help and then go find the Graf Spee. So they haven't done a dawn patrol. The Graf Spee is continuing on. It's created a search area using the information it has picked up from the merchant ships it has captured recently. It's boarded. And it is using that search area to try and find targets. And yes, I am recovering from a cold when I'm recording this, so please excuse the sniffles. This is actually from a far bigger map in ADM 186794, but it's a good section from it. And it shows roughly what's happening. The Ajax, Achilles and Exeter are together, coming up from the south. The Graf Spee is actually coming down from the north. Well, technically, they're heading in a northeast direction from the southwest, Graf Spee is heading in a southwesterly direction. It's going to be a big day. First things first, who spots who first? German accounts tend to claim they spotted them first. British accounts tend to suggest the British spotted first. Honestly, both probably spotted each other within a couple of minutes of each other, and once you've got the timelines, it's probably roughly the same. What happens is how they spot each other, and that's what matters. The battle begins. So when the battle first begins, the ships are spread out as so. Graf Spee, here. Ajax and Achilles are roughly in this area. Exeter is pretty much here. Now, the interesting thing is, Graf Spee's massive advantage is, of course, her 11-inch guns and the range they afford her. Theoretically. In reality, she uses high explosive for them throughout the battle, and this doesn't seem to do as much damage as armour piercing would have done, which is what the 8-inch and the 6-inch guns definitely are firing. German reports after the battle tend to always emphasise the role of Exeter's 8-inch shells in causing all their damage. They may be true, but it's doubtful, simply because as the battle goes on, Exeter ends up with only one turret firing and is at long range, whereas Ajax and Achilles, admittedly Ajax will lose 2 turrets as well and stop working, will be firing throughout and will get progressively closer, including at some points getting down to just 8,000 yards, which in naval gunnery range is spitballing distance. So it's always easy to talk about the bigger guns and put everything on the bigger guns, but armour piercing does make a difference. Accuracy of fire does make a difference. And the Panzerschiff's armour doesn't appear to be as good as advertised. There are lots of issues. The biggest issue though going on is the fact that Langsdorff, to get a decent view of the battle, has to command it from an unarmoured position. And so he gets very high up on his ship very quickly, but it's a very exposed position and himself gets wounded several times. Now, the battle starts off with the Graf Spee opening fire first. And the Graf Spee divides its fire at first between Ajax and Exeter. But this causes a trouble because Langsdorff is trying to work out what to do. As far as he sees it, he is engaging, as I said, 2 destroyers and a cruiser. That's what he thinks is engaging. The mass differences, mass similarities between destroyers and light cruisers in the Royal Navy have confused him at the beginning. Combined with distance, combined with the fact that he's down in the South Atlantic, he's very surprised to have come across a Royal Navy cruiser, let alone an entire cruiser force waiting for him. But that is what he has done. And they are now starting the firing. They start off with concentration firing. And concentration firing means that all the guns are firing at the same point on the ship. Instead of them being independently targeted, they are all grouped together, they're all lining up, bang, 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 all the shells, hopefully, if everything works perfectly, will hit the same spot. Reality is, of course, different, but you know, that's a nice dream. They are going at full speed. They are up to 25, 28, 30 knots very quickly. The Exeter is putting on all the extra burners she can. She's getting up to full speed. She is firing everything as important as much as she can. And as important as all this is, the most important thing they're all worrying about is keeping their A arcs open. Now, A arcs is their primary firing arcs, and if you have your A arcs all open, that means you can fire or concentrate all your weaponry. So that's orientating how you're positioning your ships in a fight. Interestingly enough, Graf Spee in theory has an advantage. Because the way the wind and everything is orientated on them, they will not have their shell fire, the smoke from their shells, covering and obscuring their firing sights. However, the same thing means that they can't use smoke, either by making it or by their own funnels, to cover themselves if they need to get into trouble or get out of trouble. Now, what happens as they go on is things will develop, but what happens in this first phase of the battle is quite quick. You have the fighting really starts, if we're taking Harwood's timeline at 6:14, honestly it's probably been going for about 15 minutes by that point. It's probably started off in terms of visibility, vision for about the last 15 minutes, but things take times to work through staffs, you know, for the alert to reach the Commodore, for the spotters to be sure what they're seeing. A smudge on the horizon, you might see something and think, ooh, that is something, but you don't know what it is till you get closer. So that's why we say, could well be spotting at 6 a.m, but till they're sure by 6:14. But the aircraft, the Ajax aircraft, actually doesn't go off till about 22 minutes later, 23 minutes later. So they've actually been engaging, fighting for about 23 minutes before they managed to launch their aircraft. In an ideal world, they'd have launched it earlier. And actually, this is again advantage Langsdorff. By charging in, he's managed to stop them being able to launch aircraft early. He stopped Exeter launching her 2 aircraft. And when the Ajax aircraft does launch, she has her wireless configured for reconnaissance rather than for spotting. This all makes issues. So all these things are factors going on. But you have to remember there is a speed going on here. We're talking at the initial fight, the range is at 20,000 yards, roughly. 19,400 yards, 19,800 yards, give or take, it's 20,000 yards they're engaging at. That is a long, long way. And it's being done visually. Yes, the Graf Spee has the Seacat radar. No, it doesn't identify targets. It's just telling them there's something there which they've already spotted. It's not really acting as active as that. In fact, their A turret of the Graf Spee actually doesn't work at the beginning due to a magneto issue. So they have to move that around. So they have all sorts of issues on both sides going on. But the fight has started. The ships are dividing up. Harwood's plan is going into motion. And what's interesting is that the firing almost immediately starts to work in terms of dividing the Graf Spee's fire, defining what it can do and its intentions. It can't concentrate and kill. Now, the biggest problem that they're going to have in the fight, and I have a feeling at this point that the Graf Spee is very low on armor-piercing shells, because several accounts I read on them, they're not using them. They're using high explosive. And this doesn't have the impact they need it to have, especially on the Exeter, but even on the Achilles and the Ajax. So even lightly armoured ships are doing quite well against the high explosive. If it had been using armour-piercing rounds, and if it had got 8 hits on Exeter and the hits on Ajax it should have caused a lot more damage. It should have sunk Exeter if it was using armour-piercing. So that's an interesting discussion. Why weren't they using armour-piercing? Were they worrying about a future fight with a battle cruiser or something bigger? But you worry about the fight you're in is what you should be doing. That's my one critique on Langsdorff here. Now, HMS Exeter, the big stick in Harwood's arsenal, the thing which he can rely on most in the battle, goes into battle looking something like this. She's beautiful. She has 6 8-inch guns mounted in 3 turrets, A, B, and down at the back, Y. That could have been a good joke, but it actually isn't. She's carrying 2 spotter aircraft. And yes, she might be a Type B heavy cruiser, but she's still a heavy cruiser. She's got armour, she's got power. She is a solid ship for convoy, for merchant protection. She is the perfect ship, in theory, according to the 1920s when she was designed for this type of mission. For sitting out on a far-flung station and waiting for the enemy to come so she can engage them and destroy them. She would start the battle, as I said, looking like this. And there's another picture of her when she's looking quite good. These are pictures of her when she's in the Falkland Islands. As you can see, A and B turret knocked out completely. She's got a 7-degree list still, and she's smashed along. Luckily for her, most of the damage would actually happen up front, which would keep her mobile and also mean that Y turret would keep going until its own pressures stopped working. It's sometimes put down as electrical failure, sometimes put as different things, but basically the pressure pump stopped working. But what does she do during the battle? How does she get to this state? Well, it starts off at actually 06:23 hours. Admiral Graf Spee's 3rd concentrated salvo. This is i.e. when both A and Y turrets, both its forward and its aft turret, are firing together as a concentration sim. The front turret's working. All 6 shells fired, bang, bang, bang. 3rd salvo, 1 of those shells bursts amidships. One of them bursts amidships. It's this damage here. It wipes out a starboard torpedo crew, and it does huge damage. Basically, a lot of the damage you can see going on up here is done by that shell. And it's after that shell hits that Hooky Bell, the captain of Exeter, decides he has to go back to the stern conning post, to the stern position. We go back here, and those times it was down, roughly down there. Con from there. And that's the start of her woes. She keeps taking fire though, and she keeps fighting. Eventually, B turret is knocked out. And when B turret is knocked out, well, she has a bit of a problem. We go here. B turret is knocked out within about another minute. The next salvo, pretty much. She's now down to 2 turrets. She's got 4 of her 8-inch guns working in 2 turrets. The most forward, A turret and Y turret are still working, but B turret is gone. She will lose A turret after just 25 minutes of fighting. So, this is another reason why I'm sceptical when some sources claim that all the damage done to the Graf Spee was done by the 8-inch guns of HMS Exeter. If that's the case, then she should have stopped pretty much taking damage by about 5 minutes into the firefight. And certainly nothing should have been happening to her which would cause her to be driven off and to want to leave at this point. Because honestly, it's arguable that Graf Spee is winning the fight for about the first 15-20 minutes. Because she is causing so much damage to Exeter, because she is dominating the fight so much. But it's also because it takes about the first 20 minutes for the tactics Harwood has developed to properly start to work. And let's go back to Exeter. Exeter is what buys him those 20 minutes. Exeter's firepower, the fact that the other two cruisers have been diagnosed as being destroyers, are what buy Harwood the 20 minutes. And that's actually the core of his plan. He knew if he was engaging a Deutschland class heavy cruiser pocket battleship, we all know I prefer heavy cruiser, but at this time they did actually call her a pocket battleship in the Royal Navy ranks. It sounds cooler to say you're engaging a pocket battleship, so I can understand them, but she was a heavy cruiser. The whole purpose of dividing the fire, spreading his force so that it would stop the Graf Spee being able to concentrate, was because her advantage lay in keeping the enemy at range. And she could do that more easily against a concentrated enemy. If your enemy's all in one place, you can stay here and you can keep them at distance. The moment you've divided, you're here and here, well, hang on, which way do I go? If I go this way to keep you at range, I get closer to you. If I go this way to keep you at range, I get closer to this one. This is why I say we shouldn't really hold it against Langsdorff too much when he fails to keep the Royal Navy at range. The Royal Navy had two advantages, numbers and speed. The third advantage was in availability of infrastructure to support them, but that one doesn't really start to bear till later. What matters at the moment is that speed and numbers, because they are using those two things shamelessly. That is Harwood's plan. Yes, this is the damage that Exeter takes. But if you've hit Exeter as many times as you have, and you haven't taken her out the fight completely, then where's the superiority gone? Exeter is a very tough ship, and she stays in the fight. She stays fighting for a very, very long time. And she's key to how the battle goes, because the Graf Spee can never be sure how much Exeter is capable of recovering. As long as wide turret keeps firing, as long as she keeps moving, as long as she keeps acting aggressively, Hooky Bell prepared to ram the Graf Spee if necessary, firing torpedoes, all the things she's doing, she is still a very valuable unit and something the Graf Spee can't ignore. But also, when the Graf Spee does consider trying to close with her, to finish her off, that is when they're also most exposed to the powers of Achilles and Ajax. And please note, I put them in that order for a reason. The Admiral Graf Spee. Not as it looked on the day of the battle. This is the Admiral Graf Spee as she looks when she's new. She looks good. You can see the point where she would actually mount tubes and pretend to have another gun here and all these sort of things. But you can also see the very noticeable, the very defining tower, spotting tower. And it was up here that Langsdorff would command the battle from. Because down here, the slits in the windows that they have to try and give you view, do not give you that much view at all. And for a cruiser engagement, where you're going to be dealing with fast-moving enemy who are going to be trying to encircle you, that is a terrible position to be in, visibility-wise. So that's why he has to go up there. Her battle plan is simple. Engage the enemy, try and knock them out as quickly as possible. She seems to have decided early on she couldn't run away, and with no spotter aircraft of her own, clear visibility all day, and the enemy having spotter aircraft, you can understand Langsdorff's opinion on this one. Her best tactic was always to avoid combat in the first place, avoid confronting the enemy, but if you run into them, you can't avoid them. So then she has to use her superior firepower to knock them out. And she does. She engages at maximum range. Admittedly, at the beginning, this turret isn't working. And she keeps on engaging them. But she has the problems. This design really isn't that great for fighting other ships. And I say this understanding that people aren't going to like hearing it and not going to be keen on it. Let me explain. All her firepower is primarily concentrated in these two turrets. The 5.9-inch secondary armaments are sitting off alongside the AA armament, all these things. They will get blasted through, but they will also be wildly inaccurate for most of the fight. These should have been the equivalent of the 6-inch guns which are mounted on Achilles and Ajax. They should have been able to cause a lot of damage, but they weren't. Their shells have proved pretty weak against merchant ships, against light cruisers. Well, the Royal Navy thinks they're shooting wildly inaccurately for most of the operation. The thing is, they're not. They're just not able to cause that much damage. They seem to be loaded again with high explosive shells, and if the 11-inch high explosive shells aren't causing the death blows that the crews are expecting, then the high explosive 5.9-inch are certainly not working as expected. Her main trouble is that because of the treaties and because of trying to concentrate her firepower to save weight and all these things and displacement into these two turrets, means that these turrets can only engage two targets maximum of time. If she wants to concentrate her fire, she's got two turrets, 6 guns. She can concentrate them. She can, theoretically, she has the same number of guns as Exeter. But Exeter has 3 turrets. If Graf Spee has 1 turret not working, she's lost half her armament. But also, she can't really engage multiple targets at the same time, because it becomes very complicated for her to try and do this. And she has to do this to try and fight Achilles, Ajax, and Exeter. To fight all these 3 ships at the same time, she's going to have to split her fire. And she only has 2 big turrets. This explains, though, actually, why, frankly, the later German heavy cruisers are that much more scary and that much more capable. They, of course, have 4 turrets. They're a far more conventional layout of their armament and weaponry. But that makes them actually far more deadly, because they are able to far easier cope with the melee of a cruiser naval battle. Graf Spee is a surface radar. She's excellent for dealing with individual cruisers, if she comes up against them, and merchant ships. She wasn't expecting to come across a squadron of cruisers. Now, some pictures of the damage. These are the blasts which seem to have caused the damage to the tower where Langsdorff was, and my betting is those were 6-inch shells. Thinking about the arcs and trajectories of the ship's firing and what was going on, Yeah, I'd reckon those were 6-inch shells which caused that damage. Now, when you're looking further along the ship, you can see the damage caused by the 8-inch shells, and there's some interesting marks around this area. And there are other pictures. There's of course looks like quite a big hole there. She does get damaged in the fight. The idea that she escapes with impunity is very, very overstated. She loses AA armament, she loses aircraft, she gets lots of damage throughout the ship from structural damage from the shell burst. She is taken out as a fighting force in this fight. Don't get me wrong. There are all sorts of accounts I've read, and I would again go to this brilliant Millington Drake work because it includes quite a lot of them, but I've gone and read them themselves. There are lots of people claiming, oh, she did brilliantly well, she was holding up fire, it was the 8-inch armour piercing, or it was this factor or that factor. Graf Spee wasn't designed to end up in a fight against 3 Royal Navy cruisers solo. She could have probably taken any one of them individually. How much damage they'd have inflicted on her individually is an entirely different matter, because if they managed to get close enough under the right circumstances, they might well have been lost, but she would have been lost as well, or severely damaged. 3 cruisers is a lot though, and she takes a beating. She really does. You are looking at, a lot of these pictures are actually taken in Montevideo before she sinks herself. It's interesting to note they've done a lot of work on her before she even gets into Montevideo to try and repair the damage. And they are constantly, the crew is constantly trying to work to make their ship as viable as they can. But still, there are signs which suggest that she has got serious problems after the fight. I'm honestly, from what I've studied in reports, a lot of her crews, of her gun crews on these 5.9-inch mounts on the secondary armament, have been severely wounded, if not killed. And she herself has suffered damage that's going to stop her being an effective fighting ship. So, the battle, after it's going on for about 30 minutes, you have a different position carrying on. The whole battle is going to be less than 2 hours. But, from here's roughly 6 a.m, here is roughly 8 a.m. It's 2 hours, but honestly, fighting really stops about this point and starts after almost 6:15 here, so For about the 40-minute mark, you have Ajax and Achilles. At about the 40-minute mark, the Graf Spee is here. She's actually just put the smoke on and she's disappeared up this way. Exeter, at the 40-minute mark, has just lost a turret. Yes. Okay. She lost B turret pretty much almost as soon as the fighting began, within practically 10 minutes. At this point, she loses a turret. She's now down to just her aft guns, so she's down to 2 of her 8-inch guns. But within a couple of minutes, she fires torpedoes. Yowza. And actually, that's one of the interesting things in this fight. The Royal Navy cruisers keep going to use torpedoes. They keep going, we are going to fight and we are going to use these torpedoes. We have them, they are there, they are going to cause you trouble. And it's shameless. Now, what's also interesting is that this point, at the 40-minute mark, the range is at a roughly 13,000 yards. So it's not as short as it has been, and the range from Exeter to the Graf Spee we can only really estimate this, but it's going to be around about 10,000 yards. What they are doing is dividing the enemy fire, but what they're also doing is getting closer. And this is bad news. Remember what I was talking earlier. Langsdorff's advantage lies in range. The moment they are divided, he can't maintain that range. Because who's he going to maintain the range on? It starts to work. The Graf Spee is slowly being forced to turn around, slowly being made to go back. And she really is going back. She's gone round and she's now starting to head in the direction of Montevideo. She's being driven in the direction of South America. Now, you can argue, yes, she's trying to get away, yes, she wants to get away from this naval force, yes, she would like to go off and find merchant ships, all these things. But really, if this part of the fight, the beginning of the fight can be said to be arguably Graf Spee is winning it. It's going offensive, it is starting to dominate the fight. From now on, the mid-phase of the battle onwards, she's losing. She's being forced on the back foot. She's now having to respond to what the Royal Navy's doing. She's having to manoeuvre depending on them. She's not really able. She will try to. Langsdorff will keep coming up with ideas on how to take back the initiative and how to try and take back control, and they keep trying to implement them. But he's got this problem. He's caught in a vice. He goes for one, the others come for him. He goes for the others. He can't ignore the 8-inch guns of Exeter. Even if there's only 2 of them. He turns his back on them for too long, she is coming for him. Hooky Bell does everything apart from advance stern first. So it's an interesting fight. HMS Ajax, the flagship of all this. Now, you'll notice actually she has one of the less advanced structures in terms of superstructure space for having to deal with accommodating both a commodore and a flag captain. I.e., she has her own captain aboard trying to command her, and she has a commodore aboard her. Both spend the battle sitting up there. We talk about Langsdorff being exposed. There they are. Theoretically, they are supposed to be sitting down there, but for similar reasons. They need to see what's going on. Yes, radar is around, as we know, the Graf Spee has it. The British don't. But it's not yet in any way managed to reach the level at which you can start commanding a battle by your radar screen. In fact, it's not going to get to that level for World War II at all. So this is still very much Mark I eyeball technology. Please note, aircraft ready to go. She has 4 turrets mounting 8 6-inch guns. So rather interestingly, and please don't quote us me, it's a bit of a joke, Exeter has 6 8-inch guns. Ajax and Achilles have 8 6-inch guns. So basically, if you want to remember what the British guns were at the Battle of River Plate, just spin them round. Odds are you'll be right. 8 and 6. It's either 8 6s or 6 8s. Now, during the battle, she'll suffer damage. And interesting enough, this picture shows Achilles in the lead, which does happen at one point when they're turning around. But more importantly, it shows X turret. X and Y turret will get knocked out, and she will finish the battle with just A and B turret. And this has a big effect on what Harwood is doing, because at the end of the battle, Harwood is getting information about how much ammunition he has left and how many working guns he has. What he has at the end of the battle are roughly 12 6-inch guns left working, spread across 6 turrets and 2 ships. His own flagship only provides 2 of those turrets and 4 of those guns. They need to start repairing. So that's another reason to hold off at the end of the battle. That's another reason to hold back. And they do hold back. But she suffers a lot of damage. Not. I know. I've used that phrase in both describing Exeter and Graf Spee. They suffer a lot of damage. Honestly, the British light cruisers escaped this battle rather lightly. You know, the theory is they should have been blown completely out of the water by the Graf Spee. The Graf Spee should have annihilated. One-on-one with a Royal Navy light 6-inch gun light cruiser. That should not have been a contest. These ships should have been gone, knocked off the table. The Royal Navy should have, if you compare all the stacks and put them together, you've got those 6 11-inch guns, you've got Seacat radar, you've got all the advantages the Graf Spee has. These ships should have been taken out. And they weren't. Not only was Ajax not taken out, Achilles gets very superficial damage. Mostly she loses, and this picture is from her time involved in the Spanish Civil War. You can always tell by the painting of the colours on the turrets. During the battle, she doesn't get damaged as much. You would expect her to have got a bit of damage. But honestly, the things she loses are things like the Royal Navy ensigns. She ends up fighting the battle entirely under the New Zealand ensign. So that's why the whole way through this exercise, I have called her HMNZS Achilles, because she is the first ship to fight a naval battle underneath the New Zealand flag. So whilst, yes, I know she's HMS Achilles, I do know, people do remind me, but I also knew she is HMS Achilles. She's the first one to fight a battle flying the New Zealand flag. So she deserves to carry the HMNZS, in my opinion. And she does pretty well. She's pretty cool. Again, 8 6-inch guns. Like her sister. Now here she's pictured carrying an aircraft, but in the fight she didn't actually have one. Ajax, of course, launches her aircraft, and there's some interesting stuff about the aircraft that you should always consider. The aircraft which the Ajax was carrying had been split up for special or reconnaissance operations. And she'd been doing this prior to World War II. She'd been checking the Brazilian coast for secret German bases, which are theorized to have been down there and to support submarines. They didn't actually exist, Before this, she had actually had an infrared camera fitted to her aircraft. It also meant that their aircraft had been worn a lot, and that was why only one of the two was serviceable. But this was also the best aircraft they had available. And so they decided she was going to do a reconnaissance flight later in the day, hence they put her wireless system onto its reconnaissance setting. And this particular frequency that the radio is set to means that it's able to be picked up by all the ships in the task force and can be shared. When they're doing spotting, i.e. they're directing guns, they change to a different frequency. That means that they will just be heard by the ship they belong to, so that there won't be the confusion over the fall of shot. Interesting enough, this wireless transmission issue, this particular frequency issue, is what caused a lot of problems earlier in the fight between when they're trying to direct the guns. But still, it's pretty cool. She does, of course, get her aircraft off, and this is a decisive factor for the battle, because it means that Harwood has an eye in the sky. Harwood has the support he needs. Phase 1 of the battle ends. Degenerates into a chase after this is what it's usually classified as, but it's phase 1 of the battle ends. And at this point, you have got Exeter still firing wide turret. She's still making various course changes, behaving somewhat erratically, being steered by boat compass. She's down this way. And this is where she's gone by between about 7:20, 7:40, she makes it to this area. What we really have to think about at the end of the battle is this area though. It's the north part of the contest. Now, Ajax loses X and Y turrets at roughly 7:30, 7:28. But she then starts firing torpedoes very shortly after that. And I always love the way on Royal Navy on maps always sticks torpedo fires as some sort of V for victory sign. It's V, this area. What's interesting is if you have Ajax firing her torpedoes in that direction, they would never hit Graf Spee. Because at this point, the Graf Spee at 7:30 is down here. So presumably, actually, Ajax fires her torpedoes in that sort of direction. Presumably. Either way, it isn't fun. And this has been an ongoing battle. You can see this from the amount of times that the Graf Spee is having to produce smoke. It's having to maneuver and cover its movements. It's getting into trouble. And it's being driven. The range has also got down to 11,000. At some points here, it'll get down to 8,000 yards. And at this point, there's a really interesting maneuver going on because the two light cruisers have kept going on up here, and then they've gone north, and now they're diving south. So they extended the range, and then they dive south. They are basically going from side to side on the Graf Spee. The reason they're doing this maneuver is arguably 32. They're sort of responding to the various maneuvers going on here of the Graf Spee, but they are driving her. They're certainly forcing her away from Exeter. They're giving Exeter the cover to try and repair and rejoin the fight. And they're keeping the Graf Spee very much busy. Also at this point, the Graf Spee managed to shoot away Ajax's topmast. I think part of the advantage Achilles has is that because Ajax is flying the Commodore's pennant and is therefore this far visibly in front, Graf Spee keeps going for her. And again, it sort of reminds me of Exeter, where most of the damage done to Exeter is on the front. Graf Spee does relatively little damage the further along the ship you get. It's almost as if Graf Spee's systems are designed to aim for the front of a ship. So when it comes to the two light cruisers, they're aiming for the light cruiser in front, the Ajax. Either way, you have this fight going on. And by 8 AM, Graf Spee is out of this area. And she's starting to be chased. And the tracks have noticeably got wider again between them. But it's interesting to note that they are manoeuvring together, but also independently the whole time. And there is a lot of good, very good naval practice going on for Achilles and Ajax. They're working together in concert, and this is part of the reason they're able to achieve as much as they are. That's the chase. Now it's interesting because Exeter will first go north and then go straight south, pretty much to the Falklands. Achilles and Ajax. Well, the reason Achilles is put on this position, on the northern side of the attack, is simply because she has the most working guns. She's the least damaged ship. So she's therefore most likely to help manoeuvre if they get into trouble. There are some interesting things that happened at the SS Shakespeare, which I have not been able to find a picture of. They come across just 11 AM in the morning, really. And the Graf Spee stops near her and then signals there are lifeboats in the water. When they get to the Shakespeare, they find it's been a ruse. Later on, the SS Delaney gets spotted. The Delaney is a merchant ship, but she has a raked funnel. So she looks like a German cruiser, a Hipper class cruiser, and they're suddenly very worried. Is there another cruiser down here? Have we found one enemy cruiser, and are we being guided on to a fight with a second one? Because we can't fight two of them. Turns out to be just a merchant ship with a raked bow. You get along, and at 7 o'clock in the evening, Harwood is faced with a very big problem. English Bank is a well-known area which you can run into trouble in. The fear is that what the Graf Spee would do is go in and go round English Bank and come out and get away. He can't afford that to happen. He can't afford the Graf Spee to escape. So he orders Achilles and the Ajax turn south to cover the English Bank and Rouen Bank and these two channels. He's trying to make the most of it with the two ships he has left. Exeter is very much out of the picture now. Now, at various points, the Graf Spee decides to fire salvos. It fires 2 salvos at Ajax at a range of 26,000 yards at roughly 7:45 in the evening, before Harwood actually turns south in her. And Achilles, it's basically a couple of times as a fight. And this causes some interesting fun. Now, this is it in more detail. As you can see though, there has been a running fight going on pretty much from 7 o'clock in the evening. There has been firing. So they have been gaining on them. They have been gaining on the Graf Spee. Every time they get close enough, the Graf Spee goes bang bang, go away. And you can understand to an extent the Langsdorff doing this, but it's also to an extent a waste of ammunition. What it does do is cause an interesting instance to appear. Okay, so what this shows is one of the incidents which happens. So, the Royal Navy timeline, Graf Spee's timeline pretty much says the Graf Spee probably fired first. But that wasn't seen by the Uruguayan Navy's, what they're calling a light cruiser, at 1,500 tons. Most navies would call a destroyer. Considering its weaponry, we won't get into it. But anyway, what happens is that the Uruguay, which is the Uruguayan ship, surprisingly enough, does this. The Graf Spee is moving on a pretty much a straight line. But at certain points, there appears to be fighting going on. They're reckoning at about this time. It's the issue with the various timings going on. The Ajax apparently appears to be going at irregular speed. The Graf Spee is apparently doing 82 knots. The Achilles doing 32 knots, which Achilles would probably be very happy to have been doing. I have to say every time I look at this map, and you will enjoy it, the word the Uruguayans use for knots, of course, is Spanish, and it's nudos. Which, yeah, I'm English, I'm laughing. I do apologize. There is a firefight going on here. And this does cause Millington Drake some fun the next day, and there is a reason this map appears in his book, because it causes him fun the next day. The purpose, though, I put this in there is to show how keen the Royal Navy are on getting a kill. Remember, Harwood's plan was, in many ways during the chase, to fall back and to engage at night. To wait for it to get dark and then use the dark to approach to within torpedo range and close firing range and pummel the Graf Spee. In many ways, those instances where the Graf Spee is firing its guns by radar at range is it telling the British, we can still see you. But it's also an admission that it's worried that the British are getting close and the British will do this. Again, this point goes back to the 6-inch versus 8-inch guns. In the battle, there are played a lot of rights up. They focus, especially German side has said, on the 8-inch guns of Exeter being the primary systems which damage the Graf Spee. I think she has a healthy respect for torpedoes. Langsdorff himself was a torpedo specialist rather than the gunnery specialist. But I think also they have a healthy respect for the 6-inch guns. I think by the end of the fight, they realise that if the Royal Navy gets close enough, and the Royal Navy are prepared to get very, very close, they can do damage. So that is what's driving them into Montevideo Harbour. Anyway, hope you've enjoyed the battle.